Hi boys and girls, welcome to Stories with Enike and welcome to our home. If you missed the first part of this series, you're probably wondering who is this Enike person that keeps popping up on YouTube with these stories? Well, it's me, I'm Enike. I'm a retired teacher and my husband and I live in the beautiful forests and hills of near North Ontario, that's in Canada. I'm a mom and I'm a grandmother of 6 wonderful boys. And I love to write stories for boys and girls, and also for their mums and dads, and that makes me an old author, not a young author like you guys, just an old author. Have I ever published anything? Well, I've published one online, and it's for young adults, which is older teenagers. Your mom and dad might find it interesting too. It's called Spirals by Enike. No last name, just Enike. And you can find it online. That's the only place you can find it. It's not in bookstores, it's just online. Now, boys and girls, you might wonder, why am I telling these stories? Why am I making all these videos? Well, you see, it really pleases God that boys and girls and their mums and dads get to know who Jesus is, because Jesus is his son. And it's very important to him that everybody gets to know who Jesus is and why he was special. So my efforts to tell his story will be one little thing that can happen to help God to get the story out. Maybe you know these stories already, and if you do, that's awesome. I just hope you enjoy them anyways, but maybe you know somebody who's never heard them, or who needs to hear them, or who needs to know who Jesus is because they're sad and lonely or whatever. Boys and girls, you can help God, you can help Jesus by inviting a friend or a couple of friends to come with you, to listen to the stories, to watch the videos. Are you ready? Let's go inside and go to the storyboard. Our story starts when Jesus is 12 years old. By this time, he has brothers and sisters. Mary and Joseph's family has grown. Each year, they'd travel to Jerusalem to go and celebrate the Passover feast, a feast that is still celebrated by Jewish people around the world even today. They went, you remember that was a 3-day journey for them to travel from Nazareth to Jerusalem, and they did their celebrations, which would be more than 1 day, and headed back home. Now Joseph and Mary didn't travel alone with just their children. They traveled with friends and other relations, and it was a time to chat and visit as they walked, and the children would play. And on the way home, they didn't realize that Jesus wasn't among the crowd. They figured he was off playing with one of his friends or visiting with one of his cousins. And it wasn't until the end of the day, when they were ready to have their meal or perhaps at bedtime, that they went looking for Jesus and couldn't find him. He was nowhere to be found in that large company of people. What were they going to do? Well, there was nothing for it. They would have to go back to Jerusalem. So they went. 3 days it took them to find Jesus. They asked everybody they met. They visited every place they could think of where they may have stopped, where he might be. He was nowhere to be found. But at last, they went back to the temple, and there was Jesus. When Mary and Joseph got to the temple, someone outside probably told them that there was a young boy matching his description inside, and so they stood outside the door and they listened. And they too were amazed at the answers Jesus was giving. Finally, at a nod from one of the priests, Mary and Joseph went inside. Jesus looked up in surprise. "Jesus," said Mary, "did you not know that your father and I have been worried about you? You've been gone for 3 days. We were so worried." Well, Jesus looked at his mother and he said, "Mother, did you not know that I had to be about my Father's business?" Well, Mary looked at Joseph and they understood. They knew Jesus was not talking about his father Joseph, his earthly father. They knew he was talking about God. And inside Mary's head she's thinking, he's growing up. It has begun. He's learning to do God's work. But of course, none of the other men in the room would understand that. They just told Mary and Joseph that they had had such amazing discussions with this young boy and that he spoke with them as though he was one of them. Mary and Joseph took Jesus home. The Bible tells us he went obediently. And that's the last story we hear in the Bible of Jesus in his young years while he was growing up. And it tells us that he continued to grow in wisdom. He continued to grow in stature, and we learned from the last one that that means he got taller. And that he was in favor with God and man. So everybody continued to love him, and God continued to love and guide him too. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this story. I hope you understand Jesus was not being bad when he stayed behind in the temple talking with the priests, because we've learned that Jesus was without sin. His mom and dad were worried, and one of the things they may have forgotten to do was to pray and ask God, where can we find Jesus? We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that. But Jesus knew in his heart, because he talked to God a lot, that it was time for him to begin the job that he was going to do for God. Now, if you have a friend who would enjoy these stories, boys and girls, help me to do God's work. Bring somebody with you and sit down in your home, maybe with a bowl of popcorn and a drink, and just sit down for a few minutes and enjoy the stories. And maybe your friend will have some questions that you can answer or that your mom and dad can answer. And maybe you'll both have questions. That's good. Until the next time, which is the story of Jesus beginning his journey as a minister, I thank you for joining me for Enika's Stories.